Good afternoon. We're glad you're all here. I'm Barbara Schneider, president of Case Western Reserve University, and we're very happy to see all of you here today. The Ford Distinguished Lectures are among my favorite events of the year for three reasons. First, of course, it brings to campus true giants in biomedical engineering and related fields, people whose innovations change lives and whose stories inspire the rest of our community to do the same, people who push us to think in radically different ways. Second, of course, I love the Ford Lecture Series because it gives me another opportunity to spend time with the amazing Alan Ford. He is one of Case Western Reserve's most ardent supporters, and it is always an honor to be with him. He was a member of the Board of Trustees beginning in 1976. He received the University Medal in 1994, and of course, he was also chair of the board. Most importantly, he is full of intelligence and wisdom, and I always hope that some of both will rub off on me when we spend time together. So Alan, for this wonderful lecture series and everything you do for Case Western Reserve, thank you. Please stand up and let us thank you. And third, of course, the Ford Lecture Series gives me yet another opportunity to tout the many great accomplishments of our Department of Biomedical Engineering. It is a place renowned for its own breakthrough ideas. Today, the department is led by Jeff Dirk, professor of radiology and oncology and biomedical engineering. His academic work and his leadership epitomize the principles of interdisciplinary collaboration that are so important at Case Western Reserve. Our BME department is one of only 10 programs in the country partnering with the Wallace Coulter Foundation for Translation and Innovation Research, and is ranked number 9 in U.S. News and World Report for its graduate program. Jeff just finished his first year as chair earlier this month. He has truly inherited a jewel in BME, but I know that he is going to help it shine even brighter in the future. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Jeff Dirk.
So the year was 1999, and one of my colleagues had just purchased a sleek new device and brought it into our lab. It was a PDA, whatever that was, and it was known as the Palm 5. Of course, I know the story about how Jeff had decided on the size of the device by shaping a piece of wood and carrying it around with him just to simulate this PDA's use in the future. Like all good engineers, the first thing we did was took it apart. And in fact, what we did is took out the memory, and Jeff, I'm sorry to say, we replaced it with one twice as much as in the original model. And I'm proud to say when we got done with our efforts, the device actually worked, and we had no extra parts. It was then that I knew I had to have one for myself and not just rely on that of my colleagues, but actually go out and acquire one for my own. I bought the Palm 5X, the product of equivalent of what we had made in the lab just a few weeks before. And I used it for everything, for contacts, for scheduling, and beaming information. It was essentially my digital savior. Until one tragic day, when I made a quick stop in the men's room before meeting and watched as my digital savior slipped from my pocket and sank to the bottom of the bowl. It was then that I noticed that the device's first and only limitation was essentially one of the things that Jeff had perhaps thought about earlier. That is, it was not wood, it did not float, and it was not waterproof. I noted over and over again as I attempted to blow it, dry it back to life unsuccessfully, that these were perhaps the design limit or the design features that Jeff had contemplated but not built into the product. The Palm Pilot and the Trio PDA are just a few of the examples of the trailblazing innovations that our distinguished lecturer has brought to the market. Mr. Hawkins formed two companies, Palm and Handspring, where he led the design of many groundbreaking innovations. However, Jeff Hawkins' longtime interest in the workings of the human brain led him to found the Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience. And in 2004, he outlined his vision of artificial intelligence in the book On Intelligence, where he theorized that a truly intelligent computer should follow nature's example of how the neocortex performs various tasks. This theory is called hierarchical temporal memory and is a central component of his talk today. In 2005, Mr. Hawkins and his colleagues created a company called Numenta that is developing the new computer systems that will capitalize on this technology. As a member of the National Academy of Engineering, Mr. Hawkins is viewed by many as one of the greatest technological and design geniuses of recent times. In his lecture today, Jeff will describe the theory, its biological basis, and show the progress being made with this technology in turning the theory into useful technology. It's my pleasure to introduce our 2009 Ford Distinguished Lecturer, Jeff Hawkins.
Wow, thank you, Jeff. You know, we didn't anticipate you dropping it in the toilet. That wasn't part of the plan there. There was no planned obsolescence. But if you ever drop a phone or something like that in the toilet, the first thing you should do is take the battery out immediately and then blow dry it. But if you leave the battery in, you get in trouble. Of course, the Palm 5, you couldn't remove the battery. That was the first product, actually, ever to use a lithium-ion battery in consumer electronics. And we had to validate that it would continue to work. And we actually sealed it in the product. And it couldn't be removed for various reasons. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm enjoying my visit here at Case Western Reserve. I had a chance to walk around the campus last night, meet a lot of great people today. It's a great place. It's a great university. A lot of really cool things happening here. And this is a great turnout for my talk today. So I appreciate all of your time and the invitation to come here. It was a pleasure meeting Alan Ford. I think it sounds like a true visionary to me in many ways. So there you go. There's the title of my talk. You know, the funny thing about titles of talks is when you agree to do a talk like this, they ask you for your title and abstract a long time in advance. And so you make up something and you give it to them. And then you actually come up to the date and you say, now, what the hell was I going to talk about? I can't remember. What did I tell them? So you know, a couple days ago, I look, oh, that's the title I picked. OK, and I fit the talk to it. This is a title from actually a fairly technical talk, which I could give. And I'm going to not give as technical talk today. I asked Hunter and Ann last night to pick me up at the airport, and they suggested, you know, maybe we should weave in some sort of life lessons into this as well. So we're going to go through the hierarchical temporal memory. I'm going to tell you about this theory. I'm going to tell you about how we're turning it into a technology. But I'm also going to mix a little bit more of personal stories in it. Perhaps that's relevant. Hopefully it will be. Perhaps I should explain the transition a little bit better. Jeff did an excellent job, but explain the transition a little bit better. How does one design mobile computers and do brain research at the same time? It's hard, actually. But I actually studied double E from Cornell. I got a bachelor's in double E from Cornell. And my first job was at Intel. And immediately after my first job started, I mean, I just newbie, I picked up the September 1979 issue of Scientific American. And it was a dedicated issue to the brain. And it was fascinating. It had stories about the neuron and learning and diseases of the brain and so on. But the last one was written by Francis Crick, who was a co-discoverer of the DNA molecule, who I got to know later in life. But anyway, Francis wrote a piece called Thinking About the Brain, or Thinking About Thinking, something like that. And he sort of said, look, all this knowledge we have about the brain, all the knowledge about neurons and this and this and this, he says, it's great, but don't let anyone fool you. We don't have any idea how it works. And I remember his exact words. He said, what is lacking, what is conspicuously lacking is a broad framework of ideas in which to interpret these results. So Francis Crick was saying, yeah, we got all this data about brains, but no one had a diddly squat about how it works. And I was so motivated by that. I said, I have to work on this. I have to dedicate my life to it. I felt, look, we have all this data about how the brains are built, all this knowledge about the anatomy and physiology. And even 30 years ago, we had a lot of knowledge about it, more than anyone could absorb, actually. And we had no theories. We can solve this problem. And I said, in my lifetime, we ought to be able to figure out how the neocortex works, and we ought to be able to build machines that work like that, and those machines would be very, very useful. So I embarked on this path to become a theoretical neuroscientist, and I ran into lots of roadblocks. I tried to go to MIT, and they told me, we don't care about brains. Literally, they said, you know, we're going to build intelligent machines. We don't need to look at brains. We're just poor computers, so go away. I ended up, various things, I won't go through all of them, I ended up as a graduate student at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, in a biophysics program because there was no theoretical neuroscience. And I wrote a thesis proposal for what I wanted to do my thesis on, and it was reviewed by the faculty in the neuroscience department and the graduate chairman of the graduate group in neurobiology. They thought it was a great thesis proposal. They said, this is wonderful. You really should do this. He said, but they said, you can't do this. I said, why not? And he said, well, there's nobody doing anything like this. And as a graduate student, you have to work for some faculty and do it, you know, in their lab. And there's nobody doing this. And I said, well, where else could I go? They said, we don't know anyone doing anything like this. Now, this is 1986. This is a long time ago, and things have changed. But back in that time, that was the case. And so I actually was like, I was dumbfounded. Here, I quit my career in the computer world. I'd become a full-time graduate student, basically making nothing. And now you guys get paid really well now, I understand. And then I got myself into the situation, and I couldn't really do what I wanted to do. And so that's when I went back into the computer industry, because I said, look, I still want to do the neuroscience, but I'm up against all kinds of roadblocks. I'm up against institutional problems, not just scientific problems. And so I figured I needed to mature. I needed to learn how to make institutional change, how to manage things, how to influence people. I needed to make a little bit of money so I could put food on the table and things like that. And I figured neuroscience would mature. So that's when I started POM, and I thought it would be 4 years. I said, okay, I'll do that for 4 years, and I'll go back to the neuroscience. Well, it took longer than that. And it kept going on and on and on. It's kind of hard to extract yourself from that. But during the times I was at POM and Handspring, most of those time I was working part-time. I was a part-time entrepreneur, very unusual to do that. And I was spending a day or two a week doing neuroscience work. And that's when about 7 years ago, some neuroscience friends of mine said, Jeff, if you really want to tackle this problem, and it's a great problem to tackle, that is understanding how the neocortex works, you got to create a dedicated place to work on it, a dedicated institute. And so we created the Redwood Neuroscience Institute, and I ran that for 3 years. We had success with that, and then we decided to turn those theories into technology so that lots of people would work on it. And so that's what I've been doing the last 4 years. Co-founded a company called Numenta, and I'm going to tell you all about that. So that's the history there. Now, we're going to just jump right into brains a bit here. I brought my model of a human brain. This is the best way to stop the airport scanner people. You just put this in your luggage. I'm not joking. It's amazing. They all gather around the machine and go, what's up? What's up? It's a brain. It's a brain. So the brain is a very complex organ. It has lots of different organs in it. But 85% of the brain, of a human brain, is the neocortex. And the neocortex is this part that's wrapped around the outside, and the rest of the brain is sort of shoved up in a post in the middle of it. 85% of the volume of a brain is neocortex and its connections. And the neocortex is my interest because it's the locus of all high-level thought and high-level intelligence. All high-level vision occurs in the neocortex. All language, whether you're understanding it or producing it, all high-level audition, all I have a touch, all thought and planning, everything you can tell me about the world, any memory that you can, almost every memory you have, you can describe about things is stored in the neocortex. And so if we can understand how this system works, we might have a chance at, well, it'll be pretty interesting, we might have a chance at building machines that work on the same principles. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through, just first to describe what the neocortex does in sort of very high-level terms. And then we're going to go back and look at some neuroscience and neuroanatomy and talk about how the neuroscience instructs us to how it works. And we use neuroscience as a set of constraints to figure out theoretically how this tissue might be working here. All right, so let's just talk about what the brain does, what the neocortex does. Here's a very simple picture that describes it. On the left, we have the world. And the world has things in it. It has physical things like people, cars, and buildings, computers, and so on. It has other structure in the world, things like words and songs and ideas. These are persistent structures that may not be physical. On the right, we have the brain, or the neocortex. And of course, the brain interfaces the world through a set of senses. And we think about the brain as seeing and hearing and touching things, but that's not quite really true. The senses turn those physical properties of the world into patterns of firings on neurons. And so you have 1 million fibers on your optic nerve and 30,000 on your auditory nerve and about 1 million coming off your spinal cord, maybe 800,000, something like that. And when the brain gets to them, there's actually once you get past the senses, there's no light or sound or touch entering to the brain. All you have is action potentials on neurons, and the neurons and the action potentials look identical regardless of what they're encoding. So all you have is spatial temporal patterns coming into the brain. And the brain has to turn those spatial temporal patterns into your percept of the world, which is an amazing thing that it can do that. Your perception of these people and colors and so on, that's actually all internal to your brain. Once it gets to here, it's just patterns. And so it's a system dealing with patterns. Now, what does the cortex do? Well, it builds a model of the world. When you're born, you have your neocortex. It has structure, but it doesn't know about things. It doesn't know a particular language. It doesn't know about cars or buildings or Case Western Reserve or Ohio or Lake Erie or your mother and your father. None of these things. It knows none of this. And it has to learn it, and it has to build a model of the world. We use some words from, these are technical words actually. We say that the world consists of a series of causes. Causes, you can think of like, what is the ultimate cause of the pattern on my retina? And so we have a series of causes out there. Causes are just persistent structure, persistent patterns, patterns that occur over and over again. So words and ideas and songs and people fit that category. And in our brain, we want to build a model of the causes. We actually want to physically represent the causes in the world. And at any point in time, we have a distribution over those causes, meaning like which causes are being invoked. Right now, I'm at a university. I'm looking at lights and cameras and people as I look around the room. So that's basic. And then we could say that there's 4 things that the cortex does. Every one of them is valuable. The first thing it does, it has to discover the causes in the world. It has to build a model of things. And it does this through the sensory input. There's no other way of doing it. So these sensory patterns come in when you're born, in the first years of your life, and it has to build this model from it. Discovering the causes in the world is a very valuable thing. That's what we value in humans, people who figure out the underlying causes of problems. And the deeper causes you can discover, the smarter you are, and the more we reward that. The second thing the brain can do is it can infer causes of novel input. Inference is just a fancy word for pattern recognition. And it turns out that the patterns coming in your senses are always novel. They've never repeat once in your life. You can look at me 1,000 times, and it's going to be a different pattern on your retina, a different pattern on your optic nerve. So we always have novel inputs, but we want the model of the brain to say, OK, given my model, I know what this is. I know what causes are out there. Even though it's different than I've seen it before, heard it, or felt it, I'm going to know what it is. The third thing we can do is the model allows it to make predictions. You'll see in a moment that it's a model based on time. And so not only can you predict, you can understand what you're seeing or hearing or feeling, but you can make predictions about what's going to happen next. And you're doing this all the time across all your senses, even though you're not generally aware of it. So because you're understanding English, hopefully you understand English, and you're sitting here and you're awake, hopefully you're awake, your brain will be able to predict what word at the end of this sentence. And when you make a prediction, if you take the prediction, you feed it back into the model, that becomes thought. You can just follow prediction after prediction after prediction. So this is all going on in your head. And the last thing here is that the neocortex, we were talking about this earlier today, the evidence is that all parts of the neocortex are involved in motor behavior. They used to be thought that it's just the motor section of the neocortex. No, there's strong evidence that it's all parts. And so it also generates all high-level motor behavior, like my speech right now. And I'm not going to talk about it more in this talk, but it's the flip side of prediction. It's essentially, if you can imagine something, that's how the brain ends up doing it. OK, so that's what we're going to do. We want to know how it does this. What are the details, right? So to that, we're going to go back to the neuroscience. Now, if I took this brain, your brain, and I removed the neocortex from your head, which wouldn't hurt because you have no nerve endings in your brain. No one can feel that. And I took it out, and I would iron it flat, you'd get something like this, like a dinner napkin. A dinner napkin is a good model for neocortex. It's about 1,000 square centimeters. That's how big your human neocortex is. It's about 2 to 3 millimeters thick, just a thin sheet of cells. It has about 30 billion neurons in it. No one really knows, but it's a good guesstimate of how many. Of course, there's many, many connections between those neurons. But this sheet of cells is you. Everything you've ever thought, dreamed, felt, understood, discussed, it's in this sheet of cells. My sheet is talking, and yours is listening right now. Now, we know a lot about the structure of this sheet of cells, about the neocortex, an awful lot. I'm just going to give you a little bit of it. The major thing is that it's divided into functional regions. There's different regions that do different things. And so there's some for vision and hearing and language and so on. We know that those regions are connected together by bundles of nerve fibers at about a 30% connectivity rate. We know that if region A projects to region B will always project back to region A. There's always bilateral connection. And we know that those connections are asymmetric. And that is, they look different. Therefore, we can say which is the feed forward direction and which is the feed backward direction. Now, if you take a particular animal and you map out all the regions and all the connectivity between them, you can get a map of the neocortex. This has been done for several animals. The one that's closest to the human is the macaque monkey. Of course, we can't do it on humans. And so this is a picture of the macaque monkey neocortex map. This is a very famous drawing for a diagram for neuroscientists. Almost all of them know it. This is from Fellman and Van Nessen. In this particular picture, the little blue squares represent the regions of the monkey's neocortex. The lines represent those bilateral connections. In this particular example, the sensory or somatosensory regions are on the left. The visual regions are on the right. You see they're connecting together at the top of the hierarchy here. And sensory input comes from the bottom of this diagram and flows. So feed forward is going up, and feed backwards is going down. Now, this is a good representation of what a human would be. You can just pretend this is a human. It's a monkey, but we can pretend that's you, too. We know already, we can say many things about this. This is the model of the world in your brain. It's stored in here. We can say, for example, that knowledge is distributed hierarchically. That is, if I want to know where something is known, like what does a dog look like, or how does computers work, it's not in one of these little middle memory locations. It's not in one little section of cortex. For information to get anywhere, it has to flow through all these other regions. So information is distributed. It's not in one location. It's distributed hierarchically. We know that the system is self-training. So you have this rough structure when you're born, but there is no detailed knowledge in it. And the only way it can learn is through the sensory patterns coming in from the bottom of the hierarchy, and each of these nodes have to figure out what they're learning on their own. Nobody programs it. And the final point here is really amazing. It was been noted for 100 years that if you look at the different areas of the neocortex, on any mammal species really, it doesn't matter what species you're looking at, and you look at a section of it, there's a great deal of detail anatomy, how the neurons look and how they're connected together. And that detail looks remarkably similar no matter where you look. The visual regions, the auditory regions, they all look very similar. And it was speculated 30 years ago by Vernon Mountcastle, a famous physiologist, that not only do these regions look the same, but they're actually doing the same thing. That each of these regions is doing the same thing, and what makes one a visual region is it's getting visual input. And what makes it an auditory region is because it's getting auditory input. But intrinsically, they're doing the same behavior. This is an amazing discovery. It's true, although not everyone believes it, but most neuroscientists believe it. But there's overwhelming evidence for it, that there is a common cortical algorithm running in these things. And if you hook them up in a hierarchy, they can do amazing things. So that makes our job a lot easier. It means if we want to have a theory of neocortex, we don't have to have a theory of vision or a theory of language or a theory of audition or touch. You need to have a theory of hierarchical representations of patterns, spatial temporal patterns. OK. Oh, I should have just told you here. I skipped a slide. I highlighted here in yellow some of these regions. These are what are called the ventral visual pathway. These are the main visual regions in a human and a monkey. These are the regions associated with what things look like primarily. I'm simplifying a lot for the neuroscientists in the room, but bear with me. So these yellow regions, and we know a lot about the cells, how they behave in these regions. We know that cells at the bottom of the hierarchy tend to respond to small parts of the input space in small periods of time. So in the visual, that would be like little line segments and things like that. When you get to the top of the hierarchy, you find cells that respond to very large parts of the input space and over long periods of time. So you'll find in humans, you'll find cells that respond to when you see an individual person. They've done this. People in the surgery, they find cells that respond to whenever this person saw Bill Clinton or something like that. So that's a general pattern. Now, what this doesn't show is how big these regions are. And that's known. So I'm going to show you now all the visual regions, and I'm going to show you the relative size. So here again, we have the yellow regions, the main visual pathway, the ventral pathway. And you can see a couple things jump out. First of all, the lowest level regions, the ones closest to the input, closest to the eye, are quite large. V1 and V2 in a monkey represent 25% of the entire area of the monkey's neocortex. So 25% of what the monkey knows about the world is low-level visual information. You see the regions get smaller. I might have thought the opposite. I might have thought that, hey, you need more memory at the top and less memory at the bottom. But that's not the way brains are built. They have this sort of pyramid shape to the size of these regions. Now, this may look like it's a flow chart, like we do step A, step B, step C, but it's not quite like that. Here's a drawing that shows what it's more like. It's more like the lowest region is actually a lot of little regions. Each one is looking at a small part of the visual space, and then they converge on another set of regions. They converge and converge and converge. So it's more like a tree-shaped hierarchy. Information converges going up and it diverges going down. Now, this is, again, the ventral visual pathway for a monkey. But this basic architecture is how all cortical regions are connected together. There's this convergence and divergence, no matter whether you're talking about audition or somatosensory or vision. And this is a data structure. As an engineer, I can look at this and say, hey, that's a memory structure. Can I figure out how it works? It's not like a computer's memory structure. It's very different. But this is where how knowledge is stored in the brain. So how hard can that be? Well, it takes a bit of a time. And we worked on it for quite a while. But we have a pretty good inkling, we think, about how this kind of memory system works. I'm just going to lay it out to you in one slide. We call it hierarchical temporal memory. That's a very descriptive term. It's meant to be boring, so we're not trying to hype this or anything. But it's very descriptive. It says basically we have these hierarchical memory systems, and they're based on time. And you'll see why in a moment. And each node is doing the same thing. Well, what is each node doing? In the simplest way I can describe it, each node is looking for certain types of patterns. It doesn't matter if it's vision or hearing or touch. It doesn't matter. They are looking for common spatial patterns, meaning if two inputs occur at the same time over and over again, or more than random, I can assume there's a common cause in the world. That there's something out there that made these two things happen together, so I want to remember that. The next thing I do is I can look for sequences of those spatial patterns. It's just like memorizing a melody. So you go from sequence, pattern to pattern to pattern. And the same idea holds there. If a sequence of patterns A, B, C occurs over and over again more than chance, there's a good logic that they have a common cause in the world. And I want to remember them as a group. Now, what each node does is it passes a constant representation of a sequence, or the name of the melody, if you will, to its parent. And the parent is now looking at spatial patterns of sequence names, and then sequences of those, and so on. So if you take a very fast-changing pattern, like my speech, which changes on the order of milliseconds, and is coming in the bottom of your auditory hierarchy, as it ascends a hierarchy, it's recognizing little segments of time, and it's coalescing those. When you get to the top of the hierarchy, you have a much slower changing pattern, which is the pattern of changing of ideas or phrases, things like that. Similarly, each node, since it memorizes sequences of patterns, it can predict what is likely to happen next. Probabilistically, say what is the likely patterns I'm going to see next, and it can pass those down the hierarchy, which are basically the names of sequences to the child. So you can take a fairly slow-changing pattern at the top of the hierarchy, and it unfolds in sequences, unfolds in sequences, unfolds in sequences, and that's how I'm generating this speech right now. I don't have this memorized in some linear form. I have this memorized in a hierarchical form. Now, if you do this correctly, and there's a lot of ifs, that's a big if. There's a lot to make this work right. If you do it correctly and you feed in time-based sensory data, it has to be time-based, the system will build a hierarchical model of causes of the input space. Doesn't matter what it is, whatever patterns you push it in, it will build a hierarchical model of causes. We then use Bayesian techniques, which is a well-known mathematical technique, for how the whole system operates. And for those of you not familiar with Bayesian or belief propagation, it essentially gives you the following opportunity. It says that if I put a pattern at the bottom of this hierarchy, I set the belief of some of these nodes, like the bottom nodes of this thing. In a single pass through the hierarchy, all the nodes settle on the most likely cause that could have led to that. So in a single pass through the hierarchy, you end up with beliefs at the top say, here's what I think is going on, and it's very clear. Your perception of the world is sort of at the top of the hierarchy, and it's very clear. You don't have any ambiguity. This is a room, I'm a speaker, I'm a guy, I'm talking about brains, whatever. But in reality, the data coming on your senses is very noisy. It's changing all the time. Things are dropping out. I'm not saying every syllable, every word. But you don't hear that. OK, so that's the basic theory here. And then we said to ourselves, what I'm going to walk through now is I'm going to tell you what the process we've been going through to try to turn this into a technology. And I'm going to do a little chronology. So those of you who've been following the Ment, I'm going to talk about some older stuff, and then I'm going to show you some new stuff you haven't seen yet. So let me just do that. The first thing we did is we created a software environment for doing this. We call it NewPick. You can download the NewPick. It's free for any research purposes. And NewPick is the Ment platform for intelligent computing. But basically an environment to experiment with hierarchical memories. One of the things is that these memory systems are inherently parallel. There's all these nodes operating at the same time, so we can run these on parallel machines very easily, multi-core processors and things like that. So we wanted to hide all that for you, so the core runtime environment basically will take any one of these networks and run it on many cores as you've got, and sort of hides all the details from it. The second we do is we have a set of tools that allow you to build and configure these memories of different types and train them and test them. And then the third component we have is you can plug in learning algorithms. Because I said, oh, it's easy, just learn the spatial patterns and learn the temporal patterns. It's not easy. It's actually really, really hard to do that correctly. The end result isn't a lot of code, but figuring out how to do it correctly is hard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we have the ability to plug these in. We started off with a very simple problem. Why do I have a blank slide here? Oh, I remember why. We've been applying this to lots of different problems. And I'm going to, for the rest of this talk, until a few slides later, I'm going to focus just on one of them. I'm just going to talk about computer vision. I'm going to apply how we apply this vision. We've applied it to lots of different problems. But vision is something we can all relate to, and it's a well-understood problem, so I'm going to talk about computer vision. But remember, underlying is an algorithm that's not about vision. It's just about spatial temporal patterns. So a number of years ago, a friend of mine, a computer scientist at Cornell, Dan Houtenlocker, came to me and says, Jeff, we ought to create a grand prize in computer vision. And I said, Dan, what should that prize be? He said, well, $1 million. I guess, I don't know, maybe thought I was going to put up the $1 million. But anyway, so, and I said, what's the contest? And he says, well, we want to pick something that's very hard to do, but maybe doable in 5 years. And I said, what would that be? He says, well, how about a computer that can recognize pictures of cats and dogs? Now, you may not think that's a hard problem. Here are pictures of cats and dogs. And I assume you have no problem seeing which is the cats and which is the dog. A typical 5-year-old could do it. And you say, how hard is that? Well, it turns out to be really hard. We might ask ourselves, how would you go about this? You know, and before you knew anything about hierarchical temporal memories, you might say something like, oh, well, I'll have some sort of template for a cat and a template for a dog. And I get a new cat, I'll try to morph it to the template or something like that. It doesn't work. There's no mathematical transformations between any of these cats and any of these dogs. You can't morph them into one another. These are just totally different images, yet you have no problem seeing their cats and dogs. The other way you might say is, oh, look, why don't I just remember every cat and every dog I've ever seen and store it all? Well, there's a problem with that. One of the problems is it takes too much memory. You don't really have enough memory in your head because you have to remember everything you've ever seen, not just cats and dogs. And even then you have a problem because then even if I stored 1 million cat images and 1 million dog images, the new novel ones, I still have to match to one of these. Well, it turns out that, as you can see, hierarchical temporal memory solved this problem. And they solve it because they're very efficient in how they do learning and how they do storage. But anyway, this is the premise. This is sort of like the ultimate goal we want to do. So we said, how do we start working in that direction? So as a good engineer, you start with a very simple problem that's more tractable. And so I'm going to show you the work of one of my colleagues, Dilip George, who was a co-founder of Nementa. He did this work when we were just starting out back at R9. So we did this very simple vision system. It was only looked at a 32 by 32 pixel image space. And so we had 64 nodes at the bottom level, each looking at a 4 by 4 pixel patch. We had 60 nodes at mid-level and then 1 at the top. We then trained it on these little line drawings. And so these are just 48 little characters. They don't really mean much. And we made little movies out of them. We'd move them around on the retina of this system. And it would train through time. It would learn these sequences and so on. And then after we trained it, we could show it novel patterns. And lo and behold, what had happened is you can show it something very different than it had ever seen before, and it recognizes them. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the column, which would represent what we call the dog. These are very simple images. So you can see the dog can be facing left and facing right. It can have noise. It can be distortion. You can see the fourth column over is like a helicopter. And you can see there's all kinds of distortions. And this system is actually really good. You can download this and play with it. It's hard to beat. And you can morph it pixel at a time. It's really quite good. But it is a toy problem. But it's not an easy toy problem. It was a very hard toy problem. But we were encouraged by that result. So then we said, look, this thing ought to be able to do time-based inference because it's all based on time. So the next thing we did is we said, OK, let's start taking one of those images and embed it in noise. So this is a picture here of the same sort of patterns. There's a helicopter in this at the bottom of the image. You might see it. And it's in a field of noise. And if I just show those patterns to the system, to the HTM, it doesn't do nearly as well. It still does pretty good. It's getting about 20% recognition on that. However, if I show the same thing now, but I'm going to let the helicopter move through the image, so this is going to be a movie, you can watch it, you'll see that it pops out for you. And all of a sudden, your percept is much clearer of what's going on there. And that's the same with the HTM. It says, oh, it pops out for me too, and I get much better recognition results. By the way, this is several years old. If I did this experiment today, we'd get virtually 100% on this particular task. I should update this slide. Now we can even go one step further. I'm sorry for the use down here in the bottom. I can't see it. This is going to show the same thing in the movie, but now the noise is going to be dynamic too. So pretty much every pixel is changing every frame of this movie. And the helicopter still pops out. Not as well as before, but it still pops out. You can still see it. And sure enough, with the HTM exhibits the same sort of behavior. It's not quite as good as before, but a lot better than without it. So these were fairly encouraging results. So then we said, OK, let's go work on real-world problems. So we scaled it up, and I'm going to show you a little demo of that right now. I'll do a live demo. There we go. I hope that's I can make it full size. That might be easier for people. What you're going to see here is on the left, you're going to see grayscale images of more realistic, or they are realistic images, high resolution grayscale images. And this system here, it just basically knows 4 types of things. We trained on not cats and dogs. We trained this one on rubber ducks, sailboats, cell phones, and cows. Now, those are still hard things. You'll see in a moment. It's a very difficult problem. And we train it by making little movies of these objects, and that's all the system knows. It's going to try to figure out any picture we show, it's going to try to figure out is it a sailboat, a rubber duck, or a cell phone, or a cow. Now, all the images you're going to see here are novel. Not a single one was a training image. So these are completely novel images. And what we can do is we can come in here, I can push this little recognize button. And then it goes, and I did it real time on my laptop right here. It says, OK, given that pattern, what do I think it is? And it gives you a distribution. It says, I'm really certain that this is a sailboat. I don't think it's anything else. And so you can see that sort of the bars up there sort of giving you a probability distribution. I can go to the next image here. I can say, there's a rubber duck. I'm going to turn on continuous recognition. So every time I do anything to these images now, it's going to continually recognize. It says, yep, I'm sure that's a rubber duck. Then I can go to like the next one here. That's a cow. I'm maybe a little bit confused, but mostly it's a cow. And then here's a picture I drew. This is a picture I drew on my whiteboard. It never saw anything like this whatsoever. It only saw pictures of real cows. I made a picture of a cow on my whiteboard. I put the little webcam on. It says, whoop. And I said, what is that? And it says, it's a cow. Now, that's pretty good. I was pretty impressed with that. But let me show you what we can do here. So for example, I can move this image around. I can slide it up and down. And every time I'm doing this, it's recognizing it. Every time I do any transformation. I can move it up here. Let's just see if I get it to fail here. I'll keep bringing it down. Eventually, it'll fail. I'll just start cutting off the cow. Oh, there it goes. So at that point, he says, maybe a rubber duck. Now he said, OK, no, it's a cow. Back down here again. I can do things like I can rotate the cow. I can say, OK, let's just rotate it. And eventually, it'll fail again as well, because it never saw cows like falling over like this. Didn't do any, no cow tipping. I can zoom in on it. I can do this with any of these images. And so again, I can scroll around and say what's important here, maybe what's not important. If I just show that, maybe it won't think it's a cow. I don't know. They're probably confused. Yeah, see, it's confused by that. It doesn't know what it is. Cow again. This system is actually pretty good. I'm just going to jump ahead here to, here's a cow it got wrong. OK? Here's a cow that says, I don't know, rubber duck, cow, maybe, I can't tell. And we might ask ourselves, well, what's going on here? Why is it failing on this one? Well, there's several reasons it might fail on this one. One is that maybe you never saw a cow like this before. This is kind of an unusual looking cow. Maybe it's because it's got the big horns. Maybe it's because it's got that hairy head. Who knows? So it could be that it never saw anything like this before. It can also be because this system, as I'm showing you, has no attentional ability. It has no ability to say, it's like I flashed an image in front of your eyes and you have 300 milliseconds to look at it. You can't scan around it or anything like that. So I can imitate that. I can come in here and say, OK, let's just see if what's confusing here. Let's just crop out the cow as best we can here. And we're just going to make a couple lines like this. Bingo, like that. And you now put it back in the system. It says, oh, I'm sure it's a cow. So it was getting the grass. The grass was causing a problem there somehow. And again, we can move this around and zoom in and zoom out on it. So this is working pretty well. We're gonna have a release of this toolkit that allows you to do all this kind of stuff in June. I'm going to show you the next thing here, though. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing here. I'll show you this. I'm going to play a little movie for you. We're working with a small company called Vitamin D. And Vitamin D is doing, they're using our software in video. And so the first thing they want to do is they want to look at video and figure out what's going on in the video. And this is for security purposes. So just pay attention to the right panel here. The left one will be a little bit confusing to you. Let's move it up to the center of the screen there. And so when things start, now if you ever get a webcam, they have these like motion detectors in them, which are really bad. They basically, if anything moves, a shadow, a light, or a leaf, it says something's happening here. They want to know, look, I want to know if it's a car, I want to know if it's a person, I want to know if it's a dog, and I want to know what they're doing. And so that's a hard problem, and we're having pretty good success with this. So we're going to watch it here now. As things come into the picture here, you'll see a car coming in from the right. At first, it puts this little yellow rectangle saying, I don't know what that is. So it says, I see something, but I don't know what it is. And as soon as it knows whether it's a person or a car, it'll change the color. It says, OK, I know that's not a person. Now there's something coming in on the left here, and it's something coming out. It says, I see something, but I don't know what it is again. And you're going to see very shortly it's going to be a person. And as soon as it knows it's a person, it says, OK, it turned it red. So it says, I got a person, and then I got a non-person. And it'll track those. This is working even though the guy's carrying a sign. Again, we trained this on movies. It's the same sort of system. We're just applying it now to video here. And it'll track those guys. It's kind of fun, because now the guy's going to walk away from the sign. And it doesn't, the tracking box is not really certain if the sign's important or not. So it'll sort of include them both for a second. Then it'll snap back on the person and say, yep, there's the person. I'm going to follow him out of the picture there. So we now also have this with distinguishing certain actions. So we can tell someone's walking or running or falling. And we think over the course of the next year, we think we know how to get this really good, like really understand all very sophisticated actions. Well, we haven't proven that yet. But this is still a pretty good advance over state of the art in this kind of system. Let me go back now to get rid of that. Back here. We took the same system, again, all the vision system, and we applied it to digital pathology. Oops, I'm going to skip that. We can come back to that later if you want. We taught digital pathology. We had some companies working with who look at tissue samples, and they're saying, these PhDs, these doctors, these MDs look at these tissue samples all day long trying to look at cancer cells and things like this. And these very high resolution images, and they can spend up to 40 minutes looking on these digital pathology slides. So we gave ourselves a first task here is, can we have this HTM vision system recognize glands from non-glands in prostate tissue? And so what's a gland? Well, it's kind of hard to say what a gland is. On the left here, we have 4 images of glands. It's sort of like this vascular area surrounded by these dark cell bodies. But you can see they're very different. On the right, we have pictures that have dark cell bodies in white areas, but they're not glands because they don't have sort of the right structure to them. So we did a very simple test on this. We said, OK, let's train on 195 images of glands and non-glands. Then we tested on 80 novel images, and it did really well. This was just done in a few hours, actually. And we had a pretty high accuracy rate. There were 4 errors, but those errors are shown down on the bottom here. They're reasonable in the sense that a human might have difficulty too. They were like on the borderline. They have, well, there's some cells and vascular stuff, so we're not really certain. So this was very promising, and now we have a project going with this company and a major pharmaceutical company as well, trying to bring this to market. So I said that was all vision stuff, but we have been applying this to lots of different problems. So I talked about the digital pathology. We've done some work with voice recognition with a DARPA contractor doing speaker and gender ID, and we had very good results there. I talked about some of the video stuff. We've been working with a couple different car companies. They're trying to model traffic around cars and try to model what's going in the car. And can I tell the difference between a pedestrian from an adult from a child, things like that. We have companies that are trying to work on banking, on fraud detection. It turns out that if you look at the data that banks have about transactions, like credit card transactions, they have a whole stream of time-based information about where you are, when you are, what you're buying, and so on. And can they characterize those to sort of say what's typical for particular types of people, and can I see things that are unusual? And can I predict fraud? And we think we haven't done that yet, but we're just starting on it. We have a whole bunch of companies that are interested in web analytics. This is the idea that, like, similar idea, I can see what an individual user is doing when they're on a website or on a series of websites. And I can see what kind of things they click on and what patterns they follow. And what they want to know is, can I predict where someone's going to go? Can I serve them information they're interested in? We have some really early, very, very early, but nice results in that field as well. The pharma industry is very interested in, there's a lot of people like this. This is a typical problem. They have huge amounts of data they get from clinical trials on drugs. And the problem is they can't really figure out why the data is there. What were the underlying causes? Is the drug not working, or is there interactions and things like this? And it gets more complex than that. They get down, they have to have a sort of cellular model of them. Anyway, they're swimming in data. They need ways of processing that data in an intelligent way, and HTMs look promising in that regard. We have gaming applications, semantic analysis of text, and so on. These are things that we're starting. We're working with different companies on. Now, I don't want to pretend that this is all done. This is not all done. We're just getting started with this, and there's a huge number of things we have to do. There's all kinds of technical challenges. It's like it's just beginning to work, and I'm not pretending that this is like, oh, this is so easy. It's really hard right at the moment. Most of the work we have to do is in the algorithm side, and I won't get into details, but you know, to do these learning algorithms in real time with messy data, online learning, I mean, it's happening all the time, is actually quite challenging. And so we've been making a lot of progress in that. We have to do attentional mechanisms. I didn't show them here, but we have them, and we had to develop those, and how you integrate feedback. And we also spend a lot of time on performance. It turns out that it takes a long time to train these systems. The performance on inference is very quick, but it takes a long time to train. And that's the same with you. It took a long time to train you. You know, it takes 18 years to raise a child. And why does it take so long? Well, the theory kind of explains it. You have to basically, the hierarchy has to be sort of learned over and over again, and it settles as you train it and so on. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make our performance on training. We don't want to take days to train these systems, or even hours. We do a tremendous amount of work in that area trying to make performance better. And then we have companies interested in putting this in silicon. So we're trying to decide when do we go to silicon, when do we keep in software, things like that. If you want to get involved, and the reason I give a talk like this is not because I like to give talks in nice universities and talk to people, is because I'm hoping to get 1 or 2 of you who are listening to this, wherever you are, out on the web or out in this room or in the overflow room, if there's anyone there. I want to get 1 or 2 of you saying, Dan, that's really cool. I want to work on that. And you probably have to be an undergraduate, because by the time you're a graduate student, it might be too hard. But as an undergraduate, you know, you can say, I want to do that. And this is going to be a great field. I promise you, it'll be a great career. It'll be like getting on computers, you know, 30 years ago or something like that. So what can you do? You can read my book on intelligence. You can get out of the library here or something like that. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can download these demo applications. You can download NewPick. You can attend we have a workshop in June 25th. We're going to go give out all the stuff and go over it. And it's a really great way to meet the whole team. We also have internship and employment opportunities at Nementa for summer interns and other interns. That's been a very successful thing for us. We have a lot of interns these days. And there's my email address if you want to reach me, and don't hesitate to do so. So I'm almost done here. I want to wrap it up a little bit and just sort of give sort of the life lessons here thing again. Just a couple things. First of all, hopefully you can tell that I'm really passionate about this. I love this stuff. It's just like so exciting to work on these things. And it's a lot of work. It's very hard. It's taken me many, many years to do this. But if you think about your career, if you've become passionate about something, then you'll put up with all the crap that happens. And you can follow it. It's taken me a long, long time to do this. But it's rewarding, and as you go along, and this is my advice to people say, what's the best way to be an entrepreneur or something like that? I say, find something you're passionate about, and just do whatever it takes to make that successful. That may mean selling your company. It may mean doing things you don't like to do. It may mean starting over a couple times. But if you stick with it, it'll be successful. And that's what I'm doing in the neuroscience world here, and I think it's going to be successful. Which I can't prove that yet, but we're pretty confident about it. And so I'll leave you with that. I think where we are in this is it's like at the very beginning of the computer era. If you go back 70 years ago is when they first figured out how to design computers, the principles on which computers work. Alan Turing and John von Neumann. 10 years later, they built the first computer. And now we've been building computers on the same principles for 50 years, or 60 years. There's a phone. Does it have a silent switch? The Trio was the first phone that had a silent switch. Where was I? And so we're just getting started on this. And I think the impact of this stuff, my lofty title, like creating intelligent machines, I really think we're going to build very, very intelligent machines. They're not going to be like humans. They're not like android robots taking over the world. Don't believe any of that sci-fi stuff. It's just you can build Neocortex, not humans, but Neocortex, and model it and have it work on all kinds of problems. And I'm confident in the future we'll be able to build machines that are much smarter than we are at math and physics and engineering, things that, conceptual things we struggle with. Even mathematicians have trouble with math. But can we build brains that are good at this stuff? Brains that are good at understanding weather. Brains that are good at working time domains and sensory spaces that we are not good at. And I'm pretty certain we can do that. So it's going to be very, very exciting. And I'm hoping I can entice a few to go work in this area and look into it more. And I guess that's the end of my talk. Thank you. So I'm willing to answer questions. I have another 10 minutes. If you want to leave, don't hesitate. You can leave. My feelings will not be hurt. I see someone walking around with a microphone. We can do that, or sometimes it's easier if I just repeat the question, or do you really want to give out the microphone? I can repeat the question. That way people on tape could do it. It's quicker that way. It works. And I also get to change the question if I want to. Certainly there must be someone who wants to ask me something. I saw this gentleman back here first.
Confidence that consciousness will be explainable in terms of neuroscientists tend to use to explain whatever it is they're studying?
So this is the consciousness question. The question is, do I have any confidence that neuroscience or theories like this could explain consciousness, right? Is that a good summary? Yeah, absolutely. There's two types of people in the world. The people who think consciousness is like a big, 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 big deal, and the people who don't. I'm in the latter category. And you have to be careful about this because consciousness is one of those words like, well, what is it? What are you talking about? And they say, well, that's the problem. Well, come on, if you're going to ask me to describe something. I wrote a little bit about this in my book. I wish I wrote more because I think I had more to say about it. And I didn't think it was the right venue for that, but I should have done it because I get this question a lot. So the short answer to your question is yes. I think we can completely understand consciousness. And in some sense, in some small ways, I've started to explain it here tonight. Let me just put it this way. There's different parts of consciousness. I'll give a long answer. One is this sense of awareness. Just like, I know I was there. I did this. I'm conscious of my being here. And I think that can be completely explained by the fact that you have memories of, you can recall what you did and what you thought. So even your thoughts are memorized. And so you can go back later and say, what, did I have lunch today? Yes, I did. I was awake. I remember what I had. If I erased all of your memories of what you did today, and I snapped, you forgot everything up to this moment. And I'd say, were you conscious at lunch? You'd say, no, I don't remember anything about lunch. So consciousness, one definition of consciousness has to do with the fact that just awareness. This is the most common definition. And awareness has to do with the fact I have memories and I can go back and recall them again and say, yeah, I was there. I remember doing this. I can think about it. The second thing has to do with a thing called qualia, which is sort of like, well, why, this bothers a lot of people. Why is red red and green green, and why do I feel certain ways about certain things? And I won't give a long answer to this, but I think this can all be understood. It has to do with the way the spatial temporal correlations in the data, and the fact that you have to build this model of the world, and really there isn't, red is actually a figment of your imagination. It's just a figment of your model. Because there is no red entering the brain, and so on. But I can't give you a satisfactory answer right now, but the short answer to your question is yes, I think you can completely understand it. And I think, like in many mysteries in the world, like what's the nature of life, how do we give birth to people, we can make a lot of progress understanding these things and not be mystified by it. So that's a short answer without really giving too deep down. Another question. I saw this guy sitting down the hallway there. Yeah, you can just talk. Well, okay, you can talk to the microphone.
My question is, well, you mentioned before that these computers that you were developing, these programs, would be able to be used for things like engineering. That's interesting to me because there's an element of creativity to that. How do you see
what is creativity?
Well,
how could these things be creative?
No, I can understand. I had a
great answer to that question.
Okay. Okay, maybe that question too. But mainly what I'm just wondering is, do you actually see us being able to give very high-level requirements and a computer coming up with something that is completely unexpected, some completely new design?
Okay, it's sort of the creativity question. So the question, a couple things in there. Will we be able to like converse with these machines in high level? I have no idea. Again, we're not creating human-like machines. So nothing here is going to pass the Turing test because these have no emotions. There's no lust and sex drive. They don't get hungry. Things like that. They don't live a life like a human lives. So for those of you who think like, well, I have a human-to-human conversation with this, not in my lifetime. But would we be able to communicate at high levels? Probably, but I haven't really thought about that much. I can tell you a bit about. You did ask the creativity question. So how could these things? And so I'll give you an answer to that. Because, and I wrote about this a bit in the book. I think I did. It turns out that you're being creative all the time. Even the simplest act of perception is a creative act. And what do I mean by that? You have a model of the world. You have some novel pattern comes in. And you say, this new pattern is similar to things I've seen in the past, but it's different. And I'm going to make a prediction based on what I've seen in the past, but the prediction is going to be different. So I've never stood exactly here on this stage, and I've never touched this particular lectern with its curved top. And so this is a novel experience for me. I'm going to put my hand down, but I have expectations, I have predictions of what it's going to feel like. And if it felt like cold or like Jell-O, or if my hand passed through it, I'd be very surprised. And I expect to feel this curve and things like this. And so I made a novel prediction about a novel experience based on past experience. Now, if I take that and I notch it up several levels in the hierarchy, I can make novel predictions about very different things. I can see the analogies between starting a scientific institute and starting a business. They're different, but there's analogies, and I can make predictions about how it might be a good way to run a nonprofit. I can see the connections between building handheld computers and maybe doing a visual prosthetic device, which I'm working on right now. And these would be conceived as creative acts. But they're really just saying, as a human, I've learned a fairly deep model of the world in some areas. And now when I see a new pattern, I take the model I built from one domain and I put it over in another domain, and I make novel predictions about what's going to happen in that other domain. And that, I believe, is the essence of creativity. And when we do it at levels that other people don't have representations in their brain, it looks brilliant. But in reality, it's just the same thing you're doing when you touch something or hear something. It's basically prediction by analogy. And I think that can explain pretty much all creative acts. You don't make things up out of whole cloth. It's not like, oh, just something sparked into my head. I'm going to figure it out. I'll take this gentleman sitting down here. Guys are sitting down and are asking all the questions. What is an intention mechanism? What is an intention mechanism? Yeah, so what is intention? There's two basic types of intention. There's covert and overt, like secret and non-secret. Okay? And let me give you an example of overt attention. When you look around the room, your eyes are moving all the time, 3 times a second. You're circadian, or ding, 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 and you know, over here, over here, over here, over here. You're attending. That's overt attention, meaning I'm physically looking there, and so I'm not looking here. I'm looking there. I do the same thing with touch. When I touch something, I have to decide where to touch and move on. Then there's covert attention, which is sort of inside the head, and that's what I was actually referring to earlier. So even if you're looking at me, and you're staring at me, and your eyes are fixated, you can attend to what's over here, you can attend to what's over here. When you're listening to sounds coming in your ear, you can attend to one person's voice and not another person's voice. Same pattern coming in on your ear, but somehow internally. And that is covert attention, because it's not obvious. So what I didn't go through here, is that there's the other part of this whole theory has to do with the thalamus. And we believe the thalamus is involved in this sort of covert attention. And we've modeled that so that when we look at a visual scene, we can attend to parts of it, and we can ignore other parts and things like that, which is what you're doing all the time. It's a key part of all sensory perception. You can't really make a really useful system without it. Yes?
I'm not quite sure I fully understand the hierarchical structure you're mentioning. Are you saying an apple and a tennis ball is of the same hierarchical structure?
OK, so let me see if I understand the question. The question was, can I explain more about the hierarchy? Am I saying that an apple and a tennis ball have the same hierarchical structure? No. What I'm saying is that the way this hierarchical memory works is that the first thing that parts of the bottom of the hierarchy look at little small parts of the sensory space. So like in the lowest levels of the hierarchy, they're looking at parts of the visual space or parts of the auditory space. And they're looking at, they discover what structure is there. So the structure might be sort of curves or lines or edges and things like that in a visual space. Or in auditory, it's little frequency domains and little blips going up and down, things like that. And then if I want to recognize what an apple looks like, I actually different nodes have to look at subparts of the apple, recognize those little subparts, and then those parts get converged and those parts get converged. And it's distributed in a hierarchy. That I just described as spatial hierarchy. Like if I'm recognizing a picture of an apple, just like flashing in front of your eyes, there's a spatial hierarchy involved in it. Like a body, like my body has hands, and a body consists of legs and arms and heads, and each of those has subcomponents like fingers and arms and so on. It's decomposed hierarchically. But then there's also temporal hierarchy. And it's easy to understand temporal hierarchy if you think about language or music. Where temporal hierarchy says, OK, language consists of maybe phonemes or syllables, and those are combined into words, and the words are combined into phrases, and the phrases are combined into ideas. And that's how the representation of a speech is, or understanding languages, things like that. So it just says that it's hierarchically the world is hierarchically composed. In fact, there's a relevant thing for those who are interested. It's something called the no-free lunch theorem. And the no-free lunch theorem says there's no single machine learning algorithm which is better at all tasks than any other machine learning algorithm. That is, they have to be tuned. And this is a machine learning algorithm. I just told you this hierarchical temporal memories is it's a biological learning algorithm, but it's also a machine learning algorithm. And I said, well, what's it good for? Well, it makes an assumption about the world. It makes the assumption that the world itself has hierarchical structure, that things that are close together in space have more correlation than things that are further apart in space, and things that are close together in time have more correlation than things that are further apart in time. And if the world wasn't structured that way, your brain wouldn't work, and HGMs wouldn't work. But that's the way the world is structured due to the nature of the laws of physics. That causality, the laws of physics have proximal causes and so on. So we find that the structures in the world have that all the things we deal with in the world have this hierarchical structure. If we try to apply HGM to a system that does not have hierarchical structure, it wouldn't work. So people will say, hey, can we apply this to predicting the stock market? And I said, I have no idea. I don't know if there's any structure in the stock market data, and I don't know if it's hierarchical, and I don't know if it's a random walk down Wall Street or not. So I can't answer that question. I can tell you that vision and language and music and other problems have a hierarchical structure. Any kind of network system has hierarchical structure. So I know that was a long answer to your question. I have no idea if I answered it, but I don't think I'll be able to do any better at it anyway. I'll take someone who's not sitting on the floor. I'll take this gentleman back here.
Yeah. So there's been clearly the recognition mechanism is just, has evolved to, a pretty impressive point by this point. But I'm wondering if there's much work that's been done so far into figuring out, confidence estimates on the guesses. So this can say, can it say for instance, the program you showed earlier, this is a cow, but I'm not sure.
So the question was, first was the compliment, thank you, that this recognition system was working pretty well. And the second was, has much work been done on this sort of confidence level that I know, it's a cow or it's a dog or whatever, something like that. Well, part of what belief propagation does is it tries to force the system to a high level of confidence. It has a nature of saying, I want to conclude something at the top of the hierarchy. And we as humans do this. We don't like ambiguity. And so we'll go one way or the other. It's either this or it's that. But, and so our systems naturally tend to do that as well. If you saw the little bars, they tend to be really high and low and so on. But it's actually, your question is actually technically much deeper than that. And I think it's beyond this audience. To talk about the different ways you can measure confidence and the different ways you can determine how close you are to one another. And it's actually an issue for us. We struggle a lot with sort of what we call not a category. Like, how do I know it's clearly not one of these things? Because it wants to think it's one of those things. But what if it's totally foreign? We actually don't do as well a job at that. So that's something, an area. So it's actually a very relevant question. I probably couldn't even answer it as well as you'd like me to, even if I gave a very technical answer, but I'm not going to do that. It's not one of the highest priority things we're working on at the moment, though. We have a lot of other things that are higher priority. All right, I'm going to do a few more here. I saw this gentleman next to.
How does this relate to like a restricted Boltzmann machine?
OK, that was the question. How does it relate to a restricted Boltzmann machine? OK, everyone who knows what a restricted Boltzmann machine is. Can I answer that in a broader way? How does this relate to other machine learning algorithms? OK? Because I can get that question. I can substitute hierarchical hidden Markov models. I can substitute maxprop. I can substitute a gazillion different things that people study. So here's my contention. There's absolutely nothing new I told you today. There's not a single new idea in here. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but let's take it on the surface. There's not a single new idea in here. And so there's people who've had hierarchical learning systems. There's people who've had systems based on time. There's people who've used spatial hierarchies. And people who've had, people do all kinds of things like this. But what's unique here is just the combination. What are the important ingredients and what aren't the important ingredients? So for example, I think it's essential as hierarchical knowledge. I don't believe restricted Boltzmann machines are hierarchically structured, but I'd have to go back and think about it again. It's been a long time. They have to learn on time. They have to use time as a trainer teacher. They have to be self-training. They have to do time-based inference, and so on. And it's how you put all these ingredients together. So that's the magic, really. The magic is not like, oh, we made up something out of whole cloth. These ideas have been floating around in the literature for some time. And that's OK. When I did the first successful PDA, there was nothing new in it. The Palm Pilot had nothing new in it. There was no new technology that hadn't appeared anywhere else and someone else hadn't thought of first. But it was like how you put it together. What's the right set? What do you leave out? What do you include? So the whole field of, for example, Bayesian networks, Bayesian and belief propagation in its inherent formulation doesn't involve time. They're not self-training. It doesn't assign a certain structure to the hierarchy and things like that, which I know better than restricted Boltzmann machines. So basically, this is the idea is you'd have to take a series of, you'd have to know what to include, what not to include, put them together in the right formulation, and then all of a sudden magic happens and it starts working. And I think you have to have all those ingredients. To really get it right, you have to have all those ingredients. Otherwise, you're just going to get stuck. I'm going to do one more question because I know people are anxious. I'll take this gentleman's question right here. And I'll be around afterwards, too, so you don't have to worry about it.
I have a question about characteristic lengths and times. So
Yeah.
you're saying that our system is set up so that things that are close together in space or in time are recognized. But cosmologists are making sensible theories out of things that are very far apart with very long length scales. And quantum physicists are doing the same thing with length scales and time scales that are well below our sensory perceptions.
Yeah.
So in the idea space, as opposed to the sensory space, I don't understand what your concept is about things being close together in space and time.
Well, just take, I'm surprised you don't understand it. So the question is, can I explain further about what I mean by things close in sensory, close in time in the hierarchy? Is that right? And you're talking about, like, in the idea space, we can talk about things that happen in very long periods of time and very short periods of time. But that's the idea space, right? That's not the real space. It's not like cosmology is, So for example, I'll answer it at a couple levels. One is, I'll try to answer it. One is humans could not observe cosmology or nano stuff going on. Our brains are not tuned for it. So if anything that happens faster than neurons can deal with, we're just not going to learn it. Impossible. And things that happen slower than brains can respond, we can't learn it either. the only way we can learn those things is we take experimental results, we put them in things that do work at the right temporal time scales, like language and written papers and movies and things like that. So we take all these systems and bring them down to the time scales that humans can deal with. But the comment that things that are close in time are more highly correlated it's just that in our system and in the brain, we at the lowest levels of the hierarchy we can learn things that are associated in milliseconds apart. That's about a few milliseconds. It's about as short as you can get. But if you look at how the cells and the patterns are changing higher up in the cortical hierarchy, they're changing much slower than that. And but they're not changing over the periods of minutes. They're changing over the periods of seconds and so on. Or multiple seconds. And so those are all within the realm of which the brain can deal with, right? We can deal with things that are that duration and shorter, but nothing outside that. So we have to translate everything into that. But I think it's fairly self-evident to say that if you want to, you basically have to learn what follows what, and that's a sequence, and you have to be exposed to that, and it's part of the model. I don't know how else to describe it. That's how the model learns. It basically says, it's like saying, these notes together make a song. And I can now understand the song and recognize the song as a thing, and now I can pass the name of the song up. And so this pattern is a behavior. There's a thing that discovered recently called mirror neurons, which is very interesting because they found these neurons that respond to things like, someone who's waving their hand it's like mirroring someone's behavior. But all that's basically saying is, hey, the neurons learn to respond to temporal sequences in the world that have a consistent behavior to them. And so those neurons will fire throughout that behavioral pattern because it's learned that sequence. And that's basically all it's saying. So you look like I didn't do a good job on that. But we are over time here. So, but I'd be glad to talk about it further. Thank you again for your time.
Western Reserve, the Department of Biomedical Engineering, we had the opportunity to speak with Erica Weiss, who's a local artist of Korean descent. And we thought this was the perfect piece of art to present to you, Jeff, and that it represents nodes and patterns and connectivity. So
and confusion.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's very, very nice. I hope you don't expect me to take this home tonight.
We will send it.
Thank you. That's very, very nice. That's a nice gift, actually. So very nice. Thank you. All right. I'll be around.